Or consider this woman from a different part of her work. This is a woman in a World War II shipbuilding plant at the end of her shift. She is tough, and she is also exhausted. We know by looking at this picture just how hard she has worked all day. Lange's women may be lovely, but they're never cute. A mistiness that had characterized some of her studio portraiture disappeared entirely. The Depression women were sharply etched. They were often thin but always sturdy, often delicate but always tough. Like this one. Lange made many Madonnas. The most famous picture that I showed you at the beginning, the Migrant Mother as it's called, is of course a Madonna. Their compositional structure could be said to repeat that of many Renaissance religious paintings. They're absolutely in the Christian iconographic tradition. As mothers supporting their children, they are reassuring, but reassuring not only in their sanctity, but also in their strength. Consider this woman. She's vulnerable. She is living in nothing but a flimsy lean-to constructed by tying a piece of canvas between a tree and a stake. By all appearances, she is not exactly overflowing with milk, but there's absolutely no mistaking the determination of her steely gaze. Lange's Madonnas are different and sometimes startling. She made many Black and Mexican-American Madonnas. And you can be sure that very few whites in the 1930s had ever imagined Mary as a woman of color. It's not just that her Madonnas are not stereotypes. What's more important, if you look at this woman, for example, is it's clear that mothering is only part of her labor. Furthermore, Lange's women do not always look on their children with beatific peace. They're worried and burdened by their children, and sometimes by their expected children. These pictures, or especially the seated woman, where her pregnancy is very opposite, would have been quite shocking in the 1930s, when it was really not appropriate to show pictures of pregnant women, and women were supposed to wear clothing that completely disguised their pregnancy. But you can see the worry in these women's faces, certainly a worry that is equal to that of men who were unable to support their families. Lange's women were rarely sexualized, but they were often entirely fetching. Even the destitute women like this walking the highway are often well-dressed. They have vitality. They take care of themselves. One of the most striking things, though, is Lange's photographs of men. These male portraits are less brawny than the standard 1930s style, and to my taste, far more attractive. The men are as graceful as the women. The men's bodies show a kind of lean self-confidence. But perhaps the most striking aspect of gender in all of Lange's photographs is in her literally scores of photographs of fathers with their children. There are so many of them that the one photography critic who writes about Dorothea Lange has called them her Padonnas. These photographs are often happier, even simpler in their tenderness and their paternal pride than the mother-child photographs. There seems to be less tension and just a tremendous delicacy in the relationships. This is one of my very favorites, which I like to include because I do want you to understand that Lange could do joy as well as other moods. This is a portrait of a migrant farm worker who has come back to his camp after a hard day's work, and he's being effusively greeted by two of his children and this little dog who wants to climb on top of him, and you can just feel the intense pleasure in the moment. These fathers contrast sharply with many of her portraits of men alone. In the Depression, Lange's trademark subject were dejected men, men unable to embody masterful masculinity. While populist heroes were typically independent and unwavering, she was drawn to the plight of men who had been reduced by the Depression, who had lost confidence, men who slumped and brooded. She was exquisitely sensitive to the heavy toll that inability to support their families took on men. And her photographs with the internment camp are saturated with sympathy for men's humiliation. The picture on the upper right is a portrait of a man in the barracks of one of the Japanese internment camps. Closely connected, I think, to her unconventional gender images is her extraordinary attention to bodies. Some of her greatest portraits show no faces. This kinetic awareness contributed to a kind of muscularity in her pictures, which makes her subjects solid. And this was true of women as well as men. And here, too, I think there is a politics, because making these citizens reliable and durable as substantial was part of the visual embodiment of the New Deal and its hopes. Lange's body sensitivity also derived probably from her own sense of her body as clumsy. Very occasionally, she made images of so-called cripples, as they were called then, but she was much less interested in disability than in grace, less in weakness than in strength. In this respect, her pictures also fit the international popular front style of monumental people, but always with a twist and with a remarkable delicacy. In Lange's vision, however, bodies are not only strong, but they're elegant and eloquent in their gesture and posture. If there was any doubt about the connection between her own body and her subjects, the doubt would be erased by her literally scores of photographs of feet. Everywhere she went, she made photographs of feet. Literary critics would say that this is an example of visual synecdoche, using a part of a person to stand for the whole. She also worked particularly expertly at showing people in connection with each other. These insights, too, often arose from using bodies to show relationships, noticing the way that people touched or held their bodies in connection with each other's. She liked engagement, whether it was warm or hostile. And the one at the top left is a photograph of Southern sharecroppers. The one at the bottom right is a photograph of World War II defense workers. Lange responded with great enthusiasm to the progressive social movements of the 1950s and 60s. She became an immediate and ardent supporter of the New Left, from the 1956 Montgomery bus boycott to the 1957 first appearance of student activism at the University of California, Berkeley, to the early 1960s birth of the anti-Vietnam War movement. In the last years of her life, as she was already very ill, she got an extraordinary request, which made her feel very good. She was approached by a group of photographers who worked with the civil rights organization known as SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to help them and to sponsor them in creating a collective project to document the civil rights movement. She was absolutely thrilled by the project and set to work to help them, but she died in 1965 before this could take form.